Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked, blissed. Dr. Shealy, are you blissed?
Kind of hard to be blissed today. My 32nd burglary in 10 days. I'm angry, however.
Yeah. And you know, Dr. Shealy, it's great to hear your voice. And George in New Hampshire, USA Prepares instructor, is joining us. Welcome, George.
Hello, Dr. Shealy. Hello, Finn.
Thanks for being with us.
Interestingly, my family last night was trying to talk me into getting pepper spray instead of a gun. But I looked up pepper spray. It's not very good.
Well, shotgun's a little better.
Well, I prefer a pistol.
Yeah. Well, we thought that we would take this opportunity, Dr. Shealy, if it's okay with you. George has joined us to talk about what has happened, what your concerns are, and what our collective thoughts are. Do you want to share with us what has happened over the last couple of weeks, or is that something you'd rather not do?
No, I'm happy to. 11 days ago now, we arrived at the office to find that our cash box had been taken from at the receptionist desk, and 2 pistols, which Dr. Soren had in his office desk, were gone, and 2 tablets, computer tablets, were gone from Lindy's desk. I mean, nothing else was touched. There was no disarray. The person had to have known what was happening. Now, we had a disgruntled employee who was a mess in a terrible legal battle with his ex-wife, and he quit suddenly just a few days before that. So I reported all of this to the police. They took no interest whatsoever in it. Then Saturday morning, apparently about midnight, the alarm went off. Dr. Soren's wife was called. She came over to the building. The police took about an hour and a half to get here. And this time they had actually used a crowbar to reach inside under the window and, lift up the inside lock. And this time they stole the cash box itself. Nothing else that we know of at this moment. But as far as I can tell, the police in Springfield are about as useless as the utility company in putting fluoride in your water, and the police do nothing when these things happen. They're not even interested.
Dr. Shealy, you
got a trap that we could kill people if they came through the window.
Yeah, it's believe it or not, that's illegal. It's also illegal to put a tripwire in, so that, let's say you thought, someone's going to come in and, well, what we'll do is we'll wait for them. We'll have this wire strung across maybe 9 inches or so above the floor, and they come running in, and boom, down they go. And when they're down, then that's when you hold them until, a few hours, few days until the cops show up. But you can't even do that. You can't even have a tripwire legally, because the cops don't like that, because when the cops come running in and bashing your door down, they don't want to fall down. George, any comments?
Well, I think it's called in legal terms a man trap, and it's illegal because they said that, like, for example, say a firefighter was was getting access into a building, and it was a man trap, and it was tripped. It could potentially, maim or kill the person. And I knew someone who had a number of robberies on his property, and he decided to set up a man trap. And I found this out down the line later after everything had happened, but the individual who was breaking in, of course, got hurt, promptly got a lawyer, sued, and won an out-of-court settlement that I heard was quite sizable. So, I would say, Dr. Shealy, not to be nosy, but I mean, was there anything in the cash box, or was that routinely taken out each day, I would hope?
Well, it wasn't before the first. They got, let's see, I've forgotten. They got about $400 and some odd the first time. This time we think they only got 60. We've been taking home most of the money at night.
The other thing with Dr. Soren, I would say, is that when you have firearms, like I said before, the best firearm is the one you have with you. With Dr. Soren, I understand it's convenient to leave something in a desk drawer. We see all the movies there, the old movies. They'd always, when there was a problem, they'd open the desk drawer, and lo and behold, there would be a revolver. But I mean, I think it would be better, and I'm sure that he's taken these precautions now, to just carry it on his person, because sometimes he may not be in a position or place in the office where he might be able to get to his desk easily and when he needs it.
Well, I agree. The interesting thing is that we don't have any drugs in this building, so they can't be breaking in for that. And the fact that it happened so quickly still makes me think the person did it the first time is the one who came back.
George, I've got a question for you. So we now have a situation where Federal Reserve notes were taken, cash. We have twice. We have a situation where the first time handguns were taken, and the police don't seem to be very interested in that. What happens to handguns that are stolen, based on your knowledge of, you've been to shows and events and, gun shows and things like that. Have you heard of any talk of what happens to stolen handguns?
Well, sometimes they're taken out of the country. Sometimes they end up, I knew of a friend of mine many years ago. He had a shop that somebody drove a truck right through the front of the gun shop, empty out his cases in a matter of minutes of the better part of 50 to 60 firearms and handguns. And he said that the police responded within 5 minutes, but there were so many different ways to go. Whoever it was, they must have had it very well planned that they could just pull a car into a certain place and just close a door maybe, because they came from all points and they looked, they didn't catch anyone. But he said that he thought at first that the guns had gone out of the country, but then several of them were recovered, and they had a Chinatown address where a lot of the Vietnamese and Chinese gangs. Now, I'm just saying, you just plug in different groups depending on what part of the country. It just so happened in this instance it was in Boston somehow, because, in their own world, the underworld, they have fences where they can bring the guns to, and they'll have customers to bring it, but it's all within that closed clique for the most part. And the only way that you might find one occasionally is if somebody's caught with it or arrested or in the process of committing a crime. They run the serial numbers of the gun recovered, and lo and behold, you have a match.
Okay, and then let's say there is a match, and then the police recover that handgun. Would they bring it back to the original owner and say, "I just want to let you know, fortunately, we found your revolver or your semi-automatic handgun," or do they say, "No, this is evidence," and they keep it until in the evidence locker until they decide to have a sale at the police department and then sell that evidence?
Well, it has been my experience that I've seen where the property officer would be in charge. There's a room where they would keep what they call contraband or stolen items or recovered items, or as you say, evidentiary items that they're going to use in prosecuting a case. Now, it's pretty much up to the department, the chief, and the property office's, how shall I say, scruples, where some places have now made it where they have individuals that they contract with that store the guns in the meantime. And when they store the guns, every day that goes by, every week that goes by, they're charging a fee for parking it at their location. And then what ends up happening after so many months, you now have a gun where you owe more on than it's actually worth. And they do have, sometimes the judge has a lot of leeway where he can declare it contraband. And I had a friend who a woman stole a gun at a gun show from him, and I guess she was a drug addict, but she had come in, and she had done it, and they caught her. And I guess they prosecuted her and all that, and at the end of it, my friend said, he said, well, wait a minute, where's my gun? And he had to put up quite a stink and a lot of complaints in high places until finally the district attorney decided, yeah, all right, you can have your firearm back. And this was some years ago.
Well, okay, so it's likely that that these guns may never be seen again. Is that correct? Or at least by the original owner?
Well, it depends. Like I said, if it's recovered by the police, I will say this. I have known of police of one instance where guns were taken out of the property room and brought to an individual who was connected with the department's address. Now, this goes on more often than we think. Now, if somebody was to fall afoul of somebody maybe inside of the police administration, you know, they can call this in and say, well, by the way, where did such and such a piece go? I've actually seen it where, you know, they'd be caught bringing stuff home because I'll tell you a quick story if you don't mind. May I?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. I had a friend, World War II veteran, really nice guy, good friend. He actually had the distinction of postponing the Japanese surrender by one day because the plane that came in, the white plane that was like one of those floating seaplanes there, came in with the dignitaries. He was told, anything that comes within your quadrant, you fire on. So I guess the plane showed up, and he fired on it, turned tail, and went back whence they came. So they had to postpone the surrender by one day. But this was the man, was a real nice guy. And he had a little spot in a flea market where he sold knives. And his wife was there selling some odd antiques, and he was sitting there, and this was like a little pastime for him. So anyway, I guess there had been a falling out between these two chiefs of police from one town to the next. And my friend was an auxiliary policeman in the next town. And lo and behold, should I continue after the break?
Yeah, please
Hello?
do. Please do.
Yeah.
Georgia, New Hampshire's with us. He's telling a story about a little discord between two police chiefs, neighboring towns. Dr. Norm Shealy's with us, and his building was burglarized, and we're talking about guns for this hour. We'll be right back. Dr. Norman Shealy's with us. NormShealy.com, NormShealy.com. Dr. Shealy is a medical doctor, surgeon of the year, brain surgeon, and author of, well, over 30 books, broadcaster for decades. And George in New Hampshire is with us. George, you were telling us the story about two police chiefs that didn't quite get along in neighboring towns. Please continue.
Yeah, I guess the squabble was about a jurisdictional matter, so they weren't talking at the time. So one Sunday, my friends in the flea market, two plainclothes officers came in. He didn't recognize them, and and they asked him, "Can we see this knife and this knife?" And they pointed to two German military dress daggers. This was back in the 80s, but they were still worth some dough at the time, and it was like, and besides, they were his property, so they looked at, they took them out of their scabbards, and they were double-edged. So they promptly showed their badges, wrote him up on the spot, gave him a ticket. He found out he had to go into court. He goes, normally this would have been squashed through channels there. But he said, in the end, the best he was able to do, and he was an auxiliary policeman in the next town, he goes, the best that he was able to do was he had to make a donation to the chief's favorite charity of $250, and he lost the two daggers that he had that were worth some money, and he found out later that there was a lieutenant on the force who collected. So, of course, those two items went right into the collection of that particular lieutenant, all expense-free. And all I can say is there are decent cops out there. I have met them. But I will say a lot of them, after a while, I think, become corrupted, or let's just say maybe they were corrupt before they got there. But there's a lot of temptations where, you know, they get sticky fingers, where, you know, I mean, if they can get something for nothing, it's unfortunate, you know.
Yeah, and you're talking about German daggers, and of course I've seen a lot of them in my time. And if I'm not mistaken, George, the daggers from the World War II, Germany, the Army, the Navy, and the Luftwaffe were all double-edged, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you had a World War II, yes, they were ceremonial. And if you had a dress dagger, they were double-edged. They were a collector's item. These are not something that you would use, out in the field. You absolutely would not. They were way, way too valuable for that. And so what were they saying? That these long daggers were weapons that people would use in committing crimes, and therefore they're evidence and they were taken? And by the way, how did they know? I mean, did they say that these were used in any crime at all, or did they just say they were double-edged?
Well, they just said it was double-edged. And at the time, the law was relatively new. This is back in the 80s, and this was Massachusetts. And Massachusetts is a very strange state, and I'll just say... I'm sorry, Dr. Shealy?
I said you're being kind.
Yeah, yes. They say if they even find you with a bullet shell casing, just a bullet shell casing, no bullet, no powder, it's basically just a piece of brass. They can prosecute you on that if you don't have a license. I'm not making this up.
Well, okay, that kind of explains why there were 4 Go ahead, Dr. Shealy.
Well, one of the interesting things about Springfield, Missouri is we have 2 to 2.5 times the incidence of almost every crime compared to the national average and compared to Missouri as a whole. So I don't know whether if we have more criminals or we just have worse police stopping it. But I'm not impressed with everything I've learned about the police in the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm in your camp, Dr. Shealy. I've had a chance to see what they're like. I had a chance to see how they price fix at it. If you have an expo and you decide that you want to have the police there at the main table where you enter an expo in the Springfield area, and you call the police and say, I'd like to hire a couple off-duty guys. You have to go through the lieutenant, and the lieutenant is in charge of telling you how much it's going to cost you, and it costs you the same amount no matter who they send, and it's another racket in my opinion. So the police are in the business of price fixing off-duty policemen. You think you could negotiate with each guy and say, Harry's a really good guy, I'll give him a call. No, you can't call Harry. You've got to go through the police department. It's another racket. We'll be right back. We're talking about burglaries. Dr. Norman Shealy's with us, medical doctor. George in New Hampshire's with us, and we're talking about guns because of the 2 break-ins at Dr. Norman Shealy's clinic. And I know he feels violated, and I know he's frosted. At least that's my opinion. I certainly would be. And now it comes to what happens if someone is in the office and a burglary is transpiring. Can you protect yourself, and what do you do? So let's talk about calibers and cartridges. So let me just rattle off a few. I'm going to start from the smallest, physically tall, to the largest that you might have in a pistol. Okay? So 22 long rifle, that's a rimfire cartridge, and they're relatively inexpensive, the least inexpensive in this group. Then there's a 380, 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 ACP, 10mm, 38 special. Now this is not in terms of, we'll call it stopping power. This is in terms of physical, how tall they are. 38 special. That's what the police used to carry. 357, which is a longer 38 caliber, and then 5.56 or 223. That'd be a pretty large pistol. Okay, it's actually a rifle cartridge, but they make pistols with that particular cartridge. So, George, those are the common ones. Do you have any thoughts as to what a person should consider when choosing a handgun based on caliber?
Well, I would say 22 Magnum in a revolver or a semi-automatic, but in a revolver is approximately the same hitting power as a .38 Special. And I would say there are guns now. There's one model a friend of mine I acquired that is supposed to be extremely lightweight, but I think it carries like about close to 20 rounds at .22 Magnum. And it's made out of a polymer, but it's very light, very high firepower. And I had a friend who, when they were thinking of getting rid of the .45 automatic back around 1950, he was hired by Savage. They appreciated his expertise, and he says they wanted them to brainstorm so the big manufacturers could submit new designs for a service pistol, because they found even then a lot of the young men coming in didn't have a lot of practical experience with firearms, especially from the big cities. And he said that after 2 days of brainstorming, they came up with a disposable magazine, .22 Magnum, a pistol, semi-automatic pistol, and, they submitted it. Now, a major manufacturer came out with the model. I don't know what the model is. I looked it up recently, but I'm just told it's very lightweight. It can be carried on the side, and you have a lot of firepower there. And the other thing, too, to think of in an office is penetration through the walls, because you'll have other people in different settings in the office. You don't want to inadvertently shoot, miss, and go through a wall and maybe harm an innocent, in the next room.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So, what is your choice? What do you think?
I would go with a Walter, one of the PPKs or the PPKSs in .22 that you can get like Hyper .22 in it. And I just say, for the penetration and the ease of control and the portability in the setting that Dr. Shealy would find himself in, and also being able to practice with a wide range of .22 pistol ammunition in a reliable gun that's a proven design, I would go for either that, or I'd recommend, I know everybody's going 9mm, but one gun I really, really liked, it was a Beretta Model 84, and it was a pocket rocket. It had 14 shots, but was very nice about it. It had an aluminum alloy frame. It was built by a company that knew how to build guns, and it had some very nice rounded contours to it. And I noticed that when I would carry it over the years, it would be it wouldn't bulge much at all, and there wouldn't be rough edges. And I found that it was very comfortable against the body, because when you're sitting down, getting up, moving around, some of the edges of these firearms can dig right into you, and it gets rather uncomfortable. And with 14
which
shots,
model?
380. I'm sorry.
Which model was this? The 84?
The Beretta 84. I believe they had one that had a double column magazine that carried 14 shots, and they had another model that was a slenderized version that might carry 8 shots. It was a single column magazine, semi-automatic.
I have a friend in Virginia who carried an 84 Beretta, and he loved it. It was exactly what you said, and it was chambered in .380. Now, Dr. Shealy has I believe, a Smith & Wesson laser-pointed or laser-aim .380. And Dr. Shealy, what made you select that one?
Well, I like the size of it. I tried several of the what I call pistol handguns, and this fits very nicely. And I got a holster that will hold it. But the only place I'm comfortable having it is right in the middle of my back, down, in my inside my pants, right at the very middle, in the back.
Right.
And it's very comfortable there. I can hardly feel it even when I'm sitting down.
What model is it, Dr. Shealy?
I'm sorry?
What model pistol is that?
It's a Smith & Wesson 380. It's called Bodyguard.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
that's a nice compact gun. No, I said that's
okay,
a nice.
I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's very compact. It's short. It's slim, and it has a built-in laser, which is kind of nice.
That's what I felt I had to have that.
Okay. Well, one of the things that Dr. Shealy wanted to do is he wanted to get a little bit of experience behind the trigger, and so he's coming to the farm, and we're going to spend a lot of time, at least a day, right, Dr. Shealy? Is that what your thoughts are? That's what mine are.
Yeah.
Yep. So Dr. Shealy is going to come out to the farm. And do you have any suggestions for how we should proceed in training, George?
Well, I would start off, of course, with 22s, but, they have what they call subsonic 22s. So, in other words, they're quiet, they don't have a lot of penetration, and they don't have much kick at all. And I think that if you get Dr. Shealy comfortable and just take him through stages bigger and bigger, I think at some point he's going to settle in and say, Vincent, I like, the offset between the poundage of the weapon with the recoil and the weight of the ammo, because, like I said, I'd start off with that, and like I said, it'd be inexpensive, easy, and then he can develop a lot of good habits and at the same time just adjust to the recoil and the potential flinching that you get sometimes, especially a new shooter with the recoil of a gun.
Here's what I was thinking, George, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So when Dr. Shealy comes over to the farm, I wanted to have a 22 revolver and a 1911, and these are because I have these, not because I'm trying to make do with what we have. And I also have a 45 1911 with a conversion kit to 22 long rifle.
Okay.
And I thought, and then we have his 380. And I thought what we would do is start out with one round. And the reason I'm mentioning this, class, is I think this might be something that you might want to consider if you're going to start shooting again after you haven't for a long time, or you want to train someone who hasn't been shooting, or you want to introduce the lady in your life in a very comfortable way. So, most people would just say, I'll just pick up the big one and I'll just start with that. And I think that's a mistake, as George was alluding to. So my concept was we'll start with one round in a revolver. And first we're going to talk about safety. Then we're going to talk about, how these cartridges work, how the guns work. And then put one round in the revolver and shoot that one round. And then put another round in the revolver and then shoot that. And then maybe put 2 rounds in the revolver and then 6. Okay? Get comfortable with the revolver, and that's 22 long rifle. Next we'll move on to the 45 ACP, the 1911, which is way heavier, and with conversion kit to 22. Put 1 round in it and squeeze the trigger and get a feel for that, and then 2, and then more than 2, and then move on to the 380. So that was the progression. What are your thoughts on that, George?
Well, I think the conversion unit is a very good idea, because I was going to suggest it and you beat me to it. It has a floating chamber which simulates the 45 recoil. It's kind of like halfway between a 22 and that. I would say that there's one other thing that I think is a real caveat I should introduce here. Unconsciously, a lot of people, when they're holding a gun and they're pointing it down range, if you ask them a question while they're in the stance, there's a tendency with not all new shooters, but a fair percentage of them, that when you ask a question and they turn to look at you, they unconsciously turn with the arm and the pistol and look at you, unconscious of pointing the pistol at you. Now, I'll make a confession. Many, many years ago, unconsciously, I was told that I did that when I was being taught how to shoot. So I had no recollection. I wasn't even aware of it. But what I'm saying is that just be very mindful of that, and it'll just be something where you're starting from the ground floor, and you want to develop the good habits because they'll stay with you. And it could go a long way to ensuring your safety and the safety of people around you.
Mm-hmm. And that is just a great point. And that's exactly why I wanted to start with one round, and then try it again, 1 round. And so I can watch Dr. Shealy, he can watch me, and it's a lot safer for everybody, because I'm going to be standing just about side by side with him. Not quite, but just about. And so initially, we want to practice some safety. And then, when you talk about what it's going to be like in a real situation, there's not much safety that's going on. It really isn't. And your finger on the trigger is the safety. If your finger's off the trigger, it's not going to go off. We'll be right back. Dr. Norm Shealy's with us. George in New Hampshire's with us. Dr. Shealy, what questions do you have?
Point, Vince, I just have to become good enough to feel safe having it on my body. My grandkids had a blast last night teaching me about shooting my butt off if I could in my back.
Well, you know, one thing that we're going to do is we're going to practice removing your handgun from your holster without being really, really obvious about it. Another thing we're going to talk about is how to open the door or not open the door. When someone, or in your case would be the front door, when someone comes knocking and you don't know who it is, you're not expecting someone, what do you do? How can you protect yourself? No, you've got your handgun with you, but you don't want to come to the door with your handgun in your hand because, it might be a patient, and you might, frighten your patient. So there's a balance between protecting yourself, and we'll talk about how to do that. Dr. Shealy, we have another one of our instructors. I'll even mention his name, Roy Birdsong. Roy Birdsong and his wife came to the farm, and his wife is a surgeon, and she wanted to learn how to shoot. And so we spent the day with her, and we talked about the calibers, the large frames of the semi-automatics, and we talked about the revolvers, and we let her try any one that she wanted, actually all the ones that she wanted. And she decided, believe it or not, that she liked the .45 the best. And it's a huge gun for her hand, but she performed the best with it. So, you have to try them. You have to pick them up. You have to hold them. You have to pick them up, carry it, try it, shoot it, practice with it until you're really comfortable with it. And it takes a while. It doesn't happen in just a few seconds or a few minutes. And I've heard the term, he or she is a natural shot. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if there is such a thing as a natural shot. George, what do you think?
Well, some designs shoot better because they're like pointing a finger. And all I could just say, some people just take to it. Some people don't. To me, it always felt like a dead thing in my hand when I shot it. Even in the military, it just felt dead to me somehow. I more admire it from a standpoint of construction and design. It looks cool, but at the same time, when you go to shoot it, it just feels like a dead thing in my hand. That's just the way I feel.
George, do you have a preference for a particular model that you would, if you were to carry, what you would prefer to carry?
Well, I'd look at it from different seasons. If you cover it up like a winter jacket, you can get away with a bigger firearm as opposed to like if you're wearing light summer. I have this vision of after you teach Dr. Shealy how to shoot, he's going to go out west. He's going to develop a reputation. He's going to, like Doc Holliday. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
That's what I was thinking, Doc Holliday.
I think, Vincent, you should also, I know they have some very good hearing protector now that's even electronic that you can hear normal range of conversation, but once it goes above a certain amount of decibels, which is sound is measured in, where it starts to become painful to the ears, it kind of blocks it out. And I think, and I know you're going to do this, but with eye protection, and also I would wear a shirt that I could button up because if a shell ejects and by some freak condition it goes down your shirt, those shell casings can get very hot, and I'll just say that I've had that happen to me not too often, but once or twice, and let's just say it's very memorable.
Oh, sure. And I'm so glad you mentioned hearing, because 6 rounds of a centerfire cartridge coming out of a short barrel handgun is probably loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage. Really. George, any quick thoughts?
I would say the FBI, they found a number of FBI agents had never fired a pistol inside of a building. And when they did, each one of them thought the other's gun had blown up because the sound was contained in that corridor.
George, would you consider staying with us for the next hour?
If you gentlemen don't mind, sure.
That sounds great. Dr. Shealy and I and George will be right back. We've got some medical questions as well. Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Dr. Norman Shealy's with us. George is going to join us in a few minutes. Dr. Shealy, I wanted to share with you something that has happened, and I believe I mentioned to you that I've been fired by my pulmonologist at the hospital practice in Springfield, Missouri. And interesting. So I was kind of frosted, like, what happened? What possibly could have happened that would cause me to get fired? So I went to to meet the office manager of the practice, the pulmonology practice, and she wasn't there. And so I'm trying to find out exactly what I did. So lots of phone calls later, I found out what it was. Now, so I asked the office manager, what did I do? Explain to me what I could have possibly done to get myself fired. She said, well, it says here that you have a nebulizer, and I'm paraphrasing, and you washed it out with water. I said, yeah. And that's the reason. I said, what?
I've heard of PS. That's got to be the
well, you're going to hear some
attempt to cover up YA I ever heard of.
Well, I'm going to give you some more in just a second. So I said, washed it out, yeah, and then followed by Nixall, Nixall, which is known to kill every pathogen on the planet. But didn't say that in the record. So now it says that, Vincent, now this is my permanent hospital record saying that, Vincent is just incorrigible. Vincent is non-compliant. So non-compliant. What did he do that's non-compliant? He didn't rinse out a nebulizer properly. He used water. And that's partially true. But they didn't put the second part in there that followed it up with colloidal silver and Nixall. Okay. All right, so I couldn't believe it. I absolutely couldn't believe it. So finally, last week, toward the end of the week, I was on the phone with this office manager, and I was so frosted. I said, no, I don't think any of this is true. And she said, actually, here it says right here in your record, it says that you will not take the medication that is prescribed. And I said, that's not true. She said, well, it's recommended twice a day, and you only did it once. I said, that's not true. And then I got so annoyed, I said, prove it. You're making this accusation, prove it. And of course, how could she prove it? She can't. So I said, no, actually what happened was I asked the doctor, the pulmonologist, I said, look, and I used the word allergic, and I meant it in kind of a humorous way, that I'm allergic to taking medication. And she knows that I meant it in a humorous way. I don't want to take it unless I absolutely, positively have to. Okay? Otherwise, I don't want to take it. And I said, what I'd like to do is wean off it. So if it's twice a day, can I get down to once a day? Can I get down to, a point where I don't need it at all? And she says, that's the plan. That's the plan. The plan is to get you off it. I said, well, that's great. That's what I'd like to do. So in my record, it says, Vincent refuses to take the medication twice a day. He will only take it once a day, and he is non-compliant. So I get fired. So those are the two complaints they had against me. It's in my permanent record, and I was really angry. I said, those are lies. And they won't stand. And they said, okay, so you want to go through the legal process of changing your medical records? And I said, if that's what it takes, sure. I said, I'm also allergic to lawyers, and they cause all kinds of problems. Lawyers are people who like to, cause confrontation. They like fights, and they like to charge both parties. But sure, if that's what you want to do, sure. I said, but all you have to do is, it sounds to me like this. It sounds to me like the doctor had a problem with me asking questions. It sounds like the doctor has a problem with me having friends who are doctors, like Dr. Norman Shealy. And Dr. Shealy might say, what about, have you considered this? And I go, well, yeah, it's a great idea. So I want to, full disclosure for my medical doctors to talk about the things that I'd like to know more about. Well, here's the problem, Dr. Shealy. With the whole crux of the matter, why I got fired was because I asked questions. Honest to God. That's the reason. So in meeting number 1 with the pulmonologist, I meet with the nurse, and I've got my spiral bound notebook. I've got my blood pressure. I've got all kinds of things that I've done, and I have it with me. So I have a chronological record of what I do. And I bring it with me, and I have my notes as to what questions I'd like to ask. Because you get 7 minutes with your pulmonologist, and I want to make sure that, I get all my questions answered. So I've got my questions, and they say, well, that's great. We love it when patients, have their medical records with them. They bring a log of what they've done. They bring their questions with them, so they make the visit count. I thought, wow, this is great. This is what I want to do. This is what I am doing. Well, actually, that's not what they want. They are not interested, at least in me, asking questions about things like Myers cocktails, colloidal silver, carbon-60, colostrum, inhalations of iodine, inhalations of colloidal or ionic silver. Those are questions that they don't have answers to, so they don't appreciate me asking questions along those lines. So what happens? Vinny gets fired. Now, I thought, and I can't wait to hear your comments, Dr. Shealy, I thought that by Vinny going in saying, I'll be my own guinea pig. I will, I'd like to try these things unless you have a problem with them. I'd like to try these things, and I'd like to report back to you what the results are. So here you have your own little sample of one, little medical trial of one, and I can let you know what happens with me. So what do you think? Does this make any sense? And I get fired. Dr. Shealy, that's the whole story right there.
I would say your story is probably average for people who have common sense and ask questions. Mm-hmm. And most people don't ask questions. Even if they have common sense, they're afraid to ask them for this kind of reason. But Vincent, in my experience, unfortunately, especially in chronic illness, the system sucks. It fails miserably. What else can I say?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head, Dr. Shealy. So during the top of the hour commercial break, or just before that, Mrs. Finelli got a call from the office manager and said, we are willing to change the records without lawyers to indicate that there's an incompatibility between me and the pulmonologist. And here's why it's so important. So I saw a second pulmonologist, and so I met with him for the very first time, and he said, so why are you here? I said, well, I'd like to have a pulmonologist. And he said, yeah, but why are you here? I said, well, I got fired by my other doctor. I was very frank with him, and he said, what did you do? What did you do? And I said, well, I didn't do anything. Yeah, okay. But what did you do? I didn't do anything. What? Well, you had to do something. What? We're talking about a mortal sin here, right? I must have done something so egregious that I got myself fired. And I said, well, I really don't know, and I want to know. Maybe I just asked some questions that were, problematic that the doctor didn't want to answer. Maybe that's what it was. I really don't know. And that turned out to be that's what it was. So the point I'm trying to make now is when you get fired by a doctor and you have a permanent record that says you've been fired because you are non-compliant, and they make up the reasons, it really looks like you are a bad person, that you are, your own worst enemy. And so why should anybody treat you? Because, heck, you don't follow directions. That's what it indicated on my permanent record, which they've agreed. I'm sorry?
How did the second pulmonologist react?
Well, finally, he understood after like 20 minutes with me that maybe I'm really not a real bad guy. Maybe what I'm saying is true, and maybe there's some kind of communications problem with me and the first doctor. And the interesting thing was that some of the things that I wanted to try, he suggested without me suggesting them. He said, well, let's try this, this, and this. And I said, That's great. I'm all for it. Let's do that. And that's what I wanted to have done anyway. And then my wife went to a pulmonologist, another pulmonologist, a third one, in the same practice as the first one. And so I sat in the meeting with her, and the pulmonologist that my wife went to in the first meeting said, well, here's what you have, here's what it is, here's how we treat it, here are the symptoms, here are the causes, and here are several things that we can do. And one of the things that we can do is a sputum test. I couldn't believe it, because I asked for a sputum test right away. Like, why can't I cough into this cup, and then why can't you send it off to the lab and see what's going on? Well, my first pulmonologist wouldn't do that. My wife's first pulmonologist said, why don't we do that? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So what I'm saying a whole bunch of things. One is all doctors are not created equally. That's for sure. All doctors don't communicate with their patients the same way. That's for sure. All doctors don't have the same amount of training, compassion, foresight, preparedness, conscientiousness. That's for sure. So, you can like your doctor, you can have a great rapport with him or her, but they may not have the skills, the knowledge, the experience, the compassion to help you or even desire. And in my case, the pulmonologist, my first pulmonologist, didn't have the desire, and that's why I got fired. But one of the points is, heck, if you get fired, it's going to be really hard to get another pulmonologist. It's kind of like if you get fired from a job, and you fill out the job application. It says, okay, what happened at the jobs that you've had? Why did you leave them? Well, I got fired. Oh, well, heck, there's no reason in continuing with the application because you got fired. Dr. Shealy, any quick comments before we go into a break?
I'm kind of patient.
And George is with us, and Dr. Shealy, and when we come back, Dr. Shealy's got the floor. We'll be right back. Dr. Shealy's with us. George in New Hampshire is with us. Dr. Shealy, you got the floor.
Well, I think I'm satisfied at the moment until I have a session with you that I'm ready to go. I'm ready to learn how to, protect myself and my staff.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. We're gonna go through about 100 rounds of ammunition with your gun. Okay, we're gonna do 100 rounds, and we're gonna do more than that with others. Okay, we're gonna lead up to yours so that you're really comfortable with yours. But so what we want to do is we want to use just a standard ammunition. We don't want to use the expensive stuff. Just full metal jacket 380 in a standard bullet weight. Okay, George, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that would be good. I also think, Dr. Shealy, does your pistol have a rubber hand grip on it, or is it wood, or what?
Well, hold on. I'll reach into my case and pick it out. Basically, listen. Okay, here it is. I consider it plastic, but it's very comfortable. It's sort of got a little, a few little ridges in it that make it grip better. But to me, it's extremely comfortable.
Well, that sounds. I would make a recommendation, though, that you might invest in for short money. I think it wouldn't be much more than $25. They have a grip, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, Vin. That it's called Pachmeyer grips that are made out of molded rubber, and it gives
They're
you.
Real sticky.
You do?
They're real sticky, right? I mean, it's not like gooey sticky, but your hand doesn't seem to slide around in a Pachmeyer. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. And I mean, it's got a little sort of, it's Pachmeyer, Pachmayr, and I found you can get different contours, and even have some models that have contours for each of your individual fingers. You might find that will give you a much better grip and also more control, and it might even go a ways to absorbing some of the recoil or the kickback in the pistol to begin with. I'd recommend that for you. They make them in different models, and if I'll even keep an eye out. I give you one. You said the Bodyguard, but it's a revolver. But like sometimes some of them have square butts, some of them have round butts. But I guess when you show it to Vincent, I don't know if Dr. Shealy's there with you now.
No, he's at his office, and
okay.
I'm at the farm.
No, but if you find out, I can keep an eye out, and I'll pick one up for you.
He has an automatic, semi-automatic. It's called a Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 380. So it's got the contours for the fingers. And it's got that, and it looks like it would fit his hand just very, very nicely.
Because Smith & Wesson had a model called the Bodyguard that was a revolver. That's why it gets me a little confused, because, like I said, there's the new ones and there's the old ones.
George, I don't know the difference between a revolver and a pistol and a handgun.
Okay, George.
Well, we all have to learn sometime, and Dr. Shealy, there's one other thing, and Vincent, if you don't mind, this might just take a little sideline, but it's pertinent to the matter at hand, I think. Now, after all of your years of experience and all your research and what you've seen, what you've learned in your career and the achievements of your career, it sounds like you're very, very close to probably the major achievement of a lifetime in medicine. And I would suggest that there might be a possibility that just as they have industrial espionage, they might have pharmaceutical or medical espionage, where who's to say someone couldn't break into your office to steal as much of your research as they could for whatever purposes that would save them a lot of shortcuts. And I know, Vincent, you went through this with an electronic device you designed, and somebody broke in and stole your files and came out with a facsimile.
Yes. Yeah. That's a very good point. Let's talk a little bit more about that when we come back. In class, the ATF defines a pistol as any handgun that doesn't contain its ammunition in a revolving cylinder. So a pistol is not a revolver. We'll be right back. Dr. Norman Shealy is with us. Medical doctor George is with us in New Hampshire. Gentlemen, what I've been reading about is very disturbing. There have been a number of suicides by taxi drivers, and these are guys who buy a medallion or they rent a medallion in the cities. A lot of cities require that you pay a fee, and it can be $1 million, or it used to be, for the privilege of driving a taxi, yellow cab kind of a taxi. Well, Uber has this ride-sharing system. Uber has put a real dent in the ability for these taxi drivers to earn a living, and there have been a number of taxi drivers who have just committed suicide because they can't make it go. They end up at the end of the month negative. They have lost money driving around, fuel, the payments for the leasing of the medallion, or the note to buy the medallion, plus the cost of operating the cab. By the time they're done, they've lost money and they can't see any way out, and they've killed themselves. And it's not just one; there are several of these guys who've done this. Now, it has to be pretty darn extreme for a person who has a family to kill himself. Well, the reason I'm mentioning that is here in Missouri we have a massive drought, and the price of a 500-pound cow is about $1.35 per pound. So there's no way that any farmer that I know can raise a cow to 500 pounds, sell it for $1.35 a pound, including all the costs associated with raising cows. And I'm talking about taxes and fences and fuel and tractors and equipment and breakdowns and repair parts and maintenance and all that. You put it all together, you're at a net loss. Well, I think farmers are going to be next because we have a drought. And right now, right this minute, in our neck of the woods, we have a yield of about 25% of the hay crop that we would have normally gotten. Why? Because the weather went from winter to summer and it skipped spring. And because it skipped spring, the undergrowth of the cool season grasses didn't materialize. So we're cutting what looks to be like tall grass, but there's no undergrowth and there's very little volume. Bottom line is, I think there's going to be a fire sale of cows because farmers aren't going to be able to carry them through the winter because they're not going to have enough hay. Now, that leads to, I guess, in my opinion, that if the taxi drivers are killing themselves because they can't make a go of it, farmers are going to be next. Dr. Shealy, what are your thoughts about this rash of suicides, people just killing themselves?
Well, to me, I don't believe in suicide. I think one has to find some other way out. I recognize that we all go through, trauma. Actually, I've met 3 people I call financial psychopaths that have ripped me off infinite amounts of money in the past, but I wouldn't commit suicide. And I don't know what to say to people like that. They have to find a way to divest themselves as rapidly as possible and do something else.
Yeah, and so we have the social media and we have the young people who I think are killing. This is just my opinion based on things that I've heard and read and people I've talked to. That young people are not able to cope with difficulties, and I believe social media is contributing to their inability to cope, and young people are just taking their own lives. And we know a teacher in the East Coast, and he's a high school teacher, and 6 of his students have committed suicide in 2018 so far. 6. I mean, how is that possible? How is it possible to have 1 student in the entire school, let alone have 1 teacher who has had 6 students commit suicide? Very, very disconcerting, very concerning to me. I think parents need to be paying attention, looking for signs. And I think parents need to be paying more attention to their children, spending more time with them, and spending less time on social media. Just my comment. Dr. Shealy, your thoughts about that?
Well, I think anything that helps people get through crises is worthwhile. And there are many, many roads to Rome for every single situation. And so, to me, you have to detach and do the best you can. And I don't think there's a universal answer for any group of people, especially even for any individual.
George, are you seeing more suicides in your neck of the woods on the East Coast, Northeast, New Hampshire?
Well, I know they hush it up, but I'm told that a lot of the younger people are committing suicide now. Sometimes it could be in another guise where they may not put it down as a suicide, but who's to say that, in other words, somebody could be driving along in a car, and if they have a tendency or some suicidal thoughts come to them, and especially where I'm told some of this, there's a lot of more people on depression medication, and one of the side effects of the depression medication is
suicide.
right, and homicidal tendencies. I would say it's like we're in a giant Jenga game. You know that game where you remove one block at a time from looks like a little skyscraper of blocks, and it's like they're removing not only the meaning of life, they're removing the accomplishing things, no matter how small in this artificial environment we live in, but then also they're encouraging suicide. There's a program, I believe, on Netflix. I forget the title. Do you remember it, gentlemen? The title that, in other words, it's showing young people committing suicide, and it's almost like it's being, not almost, it's being propped up almost like saying, well, this is an alternative. And at the same time, they're removing any reference to God, commandments, conscience. In other words, basically, just kill yourself and the world will be a better place. I hate to say it, but it's insanity.
The leftista, more of the leftista, the idiot Democrats and leftists BS that needs to be stopped yesterday. Sorry.
No argument from me. No argument from me. Dr. Shealy, I was working, and George, I was working on the, believe it or not, during one of the commercial breaks last week on an air conditioning system of our tractor. So during the commercial break, I ran outside. hooked up the gauges to, I'm talking about a manifold gauge set, to measure the pressures and vacuum and so forth on an air conditioning system on our cab tractor so we could bale hay. And one of the things that happens when you connect these gauges is there's a little amount of pressure that's released from the lines, the hoses, if you will, and Freon or whatever the refrigerant is just goes psst, just a small amount of gas escapes. It's not preventable. Regardless of how well you're trained to do it, there's always going to be a small amount of gas that escapes. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is I have in my hands a ultraviolet light. It's a little flashlight. It holds 2 AAA dry cells, and this flashlight is just a little bit thicker than a ballpoint pen would be. Okay, so we'll call it a thick ballpoint pen in size. And it has an ultraviolet LED on the end. So instead of having a normal light bulb at the end, it has an ultraviolet light bulb. And the dye, the refrigerant I use contains dye. And what you do is you aim this little flashlight with an ultraviolet bulb toward where you think you might have a leak of a refrigerant, and it tells you where the leak is. Kind of like what maybe an X-ray might do, or a CAT scan might do for a person. This does for a refrigeration system. It's a common tool. Now, why am I mentioning this? Well, it has to do with medicine. So I took this LED and I looked around for a leak, and I was able to find out where some Freon leaked. But I thought, my hand was really close to where that valve was that went, and a small amount of spray came out. So I took this ultraviolet light and I aimed it at my fingers, my hands, and sure enough, I was sprayed. Now, you wouldn't see that if you didn't have this ultraviolet light. And what does that have to do with medicine? Well, coughing. So a person coughs just, or sneezes. I got to tell you, I'll bet you those particles go 10 feet or more. How concerned should we be? Because I saw all these little tiny dots of this dye from the refrigerant on my hands as a result of what seemed to be an innocuous little release of gas. But you can see that these microparticles travel. Dr. Shealy, how concerned should we be out in public when someone's coughing and sneezing?
Well, obviously you stay away from it as far as possible. And the most important thing is to keep your own immune system as strong as possible all the time. Okay. That means vitamin D3, vitamin A2, added B complex, a whole bunch of normal things to protect yourself. I happen to have been on these large doses of vitamin D3, K2, etc. for over 12 years, and I don't catch viruses, at least.
All right. What about a person who's on antibiotics? What should that person be doing?
Well, getting off as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But taking plenty of probiotics along with.
Okay. Do you take the antibiotic at the same time as the probiotic, or do you space them?
Always at least 2 hours apart.
Okay. 2 hours apart. So, class, if you're on antibiotic, you want to take a probiotic 2 hours apart from the antibiotic. Do you take the probiotic with food or without food?
I think either way is okay with the probiotic.
Okay. How about antibiotics?
Well, take them on an empty stomach, in my opinion.
Okay. I guess that would be for most antibiotics.
Yeah.
Some of them are really rough on the gut.
Well, all of them are rough on the gut, in my experience. I don't know one that I've ever had in the past that didn't upset my gut for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Mm-hmm. George, do you have a medical question for Dr. Norman Shealy?
Yes, Dr. Shealy, is there a difference to sea salt as opposed to the iodized, almost chemicalized salt in terms of people who are on low-salt diets? Do you find that the sea salt is more acceptable to the body and beneficial, even for them?
Hold that thought. We're coming into a break. We'll be right back, and we'll get that answer. So Dr. Shealy's with us, and George had a question about salt, and we're talking about plain table salt, iodized table salt, the white salt that you might buy from the supermarket and comparing that to some of the other salts like the pink salt and the Mediterranean sea salt. Is that correct, George?
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Shealy, what are your thoughts?
I use only one salt, the pink salt, Himalayan. The reason is it has 3% trace minerals in it, and is much, much, much better for you. I don't like those that are iodized because often they have aluminum added to them as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is the aluminum added for anti-caking? Is that why they use that?
Well, the aluminum industry is one of the worst. It gets as bad as the tobacco industry and the pharmaco mafia combined, in my opinion. They're responsible for fluoride in your water.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like anything aluminum. I think it should be banned.
Okay. So, George, I was watching a television series, and it's called Escape to the Continent. These are people who want to get out of England, and they want to go where the cost of living is less. And in one of the episodes, they showed a process of making salt, sea salt, Mediterranean sea salt. And what they do is they take seawater and they evaporate the seawater in a series of evaporation, we'll call them like lagoons almost, and or ponds. I guess a pond would be a better term. And they literally take the salt water and continuously evaporate it, and what's left would be the Mediterranean sea salt. So there's people walking in bare feet. There's everything that's in the Mediterranean Sea in that salt, all the pollutants. And so, to me, I'm not interested in that either. The one that I want is the ancient Himalayan sea salt, which is pink, just as Dr. Shealy said. And there's one other thing that I've noticed, Dr. Shealy. When I was growing up, we had a salt shaker, and it was like for white diamond crystal salt or Morton salt, but it was iodized, and that's what we had on the table when I was growing up. Well, over the years, we stopped using salt. There seemed to be plenty of salt in everything we were eating, and it'd be odd for us to have a salt shaker on the table. Well, now, since you've introduced us to the Himalayan salt, the pink salt, we actually have a salt shaker, and we find out that we use very little of it, but we use it now instead of not using it. So what I think the case may be is if you do go with the pink salt, you'll find that you use less of it than you might of the white salt. Dr. Shealy, does that ring true with you too?
Absolutely correct. You bet. But, I buy a 5-pound bag of it, and that will last me more than 5 years.
Yes, and that's what we do. We get it from a company called Salt Works. It comes in different grinds. You can get it really coarse to a very fine grind. You pick your grind. 5 pounds, $19, shipped, delivered at the door. So, and the saltworks.com. It's not a commercial. That just happens to be where we get it. We've looked all over, and we want to make sure it comes from a company that is going to not add ingredients that we're not interested in. So that's saltworks.com. George, did you have any other medical questions?
Dr. Shealy, to make up for the iodine loss that you'd get that was supplemented in the other chemicalized salts, would you find if somebody would incorporate good quality sardines, salmon, even if it's from a can, would that go a long way to getting the required dose of iodine in the diet?
It could. The reason I don't like sardines is they're in aluminum cans.
Understood. Yeah, I never thought of that.
Dr. Shealy, what about adding iodine liquid, a drop on your skin and just rubbing it with a Q-tip? What about that way of?
It works, but you have to do it every day, and so I prefer oral.
Okay.
Would you recommend any particular kind of?
Iodoral. Iodoral.
Cool.
Iodoral. Once a day, right, Dr. Shealy?
Yep. Have a good one.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, Dr. Shealy, thanks so much. George, thank you so much for being with us.
Same here.
That's above all honesty and integrity.